In the previous section, we explored the various forms of consideration that can create binding contractual obligations in Arizona real estate transactions. We examined how money, property, promises, services, and forbearance can each satisfy the legal requirement of exchange when clearly defined and mutually agreed upon. Building on that foundation, this section brings together those principles to show how different types of consideration may be used within a single transaction and how their combination ensures enforceability, fairness, and flexibility under Arizona law. Real estate contracts are unique in that they often incorporate multiple forms of consideration to reflect the complex nature of property transactions. A typical purchase contract, for example, may include monetary payment from the buyer, a promise from the seller to deliver clear title, and additional obligations such as repairs, closing cost credits, or assumption of existing debt. Each of these elements represents a distinct type of consideration that, when combined, creates a complete and enforceable agreement. The law does not favor one type of consideration over another. Rather, it requires that each form has measurable value and results from a voluntary and lawful exchange between competent parties. The most recognizable type of consideration in Arizona real estate contracts is monetary consideration, which includes earnest money deposits, down payments, or full purchase payments. The exchange of money provides clear evidence of intent and value. However, as noted in Hall v. World Savings and Loan Association, Arizona APACE 2000, monetary exchange alone is not what gives a contract its strength. It is the mutual obligation behind the transaction. Thus, while earnest money serves as proof of good faith, the enforceability of the contract ultimately depends on the underlying promises between buyer and seller, not merely the funds deposited. Another common type of consideration is executory consideration, which refers to promises that will be performed in the future. For instance, a buyer's agreement to pay the purchase price upon closing and a seller's promise to provide clear title are both executory. The performance has not yet occurred, but the legal obligation to perform exists. This type of consideration is particularly important in real estate, as most transactions involve future delivery of title, possession, or funds. Arizona courts uphold such promises as valid and enforceable because they create reciprocal duties, giving each party a legal remedy if the other fails to perform. In contrast, executed consideration occurs when one or both parties have already performed their obligations at the time of contracting. For example, a seller might transfer property in exchange for payment already received. Although executed consideration is less common in traditional real estate sales, it frequently appears in lease agreements or settlement contracts, where partial performance has already taken place. The principle remains that performance, whether past or future, must involve something of value at the time the contract is created. Real estate contracts may also involve conditional consideration, which depends on the occurrence of a future event. These are common in contingency-based agreements, such as when a buyer's purchase is contingent upon loan approval or the sale of another property. The buyer's promise to purchase becomes binding only when the specified condition is met. This conditional structure allows flexibility while maintaining enforceability once conditions are satisfied. Under Arizona law, as reflected in Carruthers v. Underhill, Arizona 1953, even conditional promises constitute valid consideration so long as the condition is not based on illegal or impossible terms. Non-monetary and performance-based consideration can also play a vital role in shaping fair agreements. For example, a buyer may agree to assume the seller's existing mortgage or complete specific repairs before closing. A developer might exchange property for construction services, or a landlord might reduce rent in exchange for tenant improvements. Each of these arrangements demonstrates how different forms of value, monetary and non-monetary, can coexist within one transaction, fulfilling the requirement for consideration. Forbearance remains another key type of consideration. In real estate, forbearance often occurs when one party agrees to delay or refrain from enforcing a legal right. A seller might agree not to terminate a contract for late payment if the buyer agrees to pay a penalty or additional interest. By giving up a legal right temporarily, the seller provides valuable consideration in exchange for the buyer's promise of future performance. Arizona courts, as seen in Carruthers versus Underhill, recognize forbearance as legitimate consideration because it involves the voluntary surrender of a right in exchange for an obligation. Ultimately, the type or combination of consideration chosen depends on the nature of the transaction and the parties' intentions. Arizona's contract law, guided by both statute and precedent, emphasizes substance over form. What matters most is that the exchange is lawful, current, and mutually agreed upon. The Commissioner's Rule R428-1101A reinforces this standard by requiring real estate professionals to ensure that all agreements reflect honest dealings and clearly define terms of exchange. Brokers must verify that any form of consideration, monetary or non-monetary, is genuine and accurately documented in writing. Discussion. Why can multiple types of consideration exist within a single real estate contract? Answer. Because different components of a transaction, such as money, promises, and obligations, each represent measurable value, and their combination satisfies the legal requirement of mutual exchange. What is the difference between executory and executed consideration? Answer. Executory consideration involves promises to perform in the future, while executed consideration refers to obligations that have already been fulfilled at the time of contract formation. How does forbearance serve as a valid form of consideration? Answer. It involves one party voluntarily giving up a legal right, such as delaying enforcement of a default, in exchange for another party's promise or benefit, creating lawful and measurable value. Review summary. Arizona real estate contracts rely on a wide range of lawful and measurable forms of consideration to create binding obligations between buyers and sellers. Monetary consideration, such as earnest money and down payments, provides tangible proof of intent, while executory consideration, such as promises to pay or transfer title, ensures mutuality of obligation. Executed and conditional consideration further add flexibility and structure to real estate contracts, allowing for performance and contingencies that accommodate real-world scenarios. Non-monetary exchanges, including property, services, and forbearance, carry equal weight under Arizona law as long as they involve clear, lawful value. Together, these types of consideration form the legal and ethical backbone of enforceable contracts, promoting fairness, accountability, and trust in every transaction.